Something fascinating is unfolding behind the scenes in Philadelphia, and if you've been paying close attention to this offseason, you can start to see a very clear pattern forming, one that honestly separates the Eagles from a lot of other teams across the league right now. While others rushed into free agency throwing massive amounts of money around, Philadelphia stayed patient, calculated, and extremely strategic, and that approach is starting to tell a much bigger story. Think about how free agency opened. Teams like the Raiders and Titans went all in immediately, spending close to $300 million right out of the gate. On the surface, that kind of aggression might look impressive, but history tells a very different story. The teams that win championships are rarely the ones that dominate headlines on day one of free agency. More often than not, those teams end up overpaying, locking themselves into risky contracts, and limiting flexibility down the road. The Eagles, on the other hand, chose discipline, and that's where the first big move comes into focus. Instead of chasing inflated deals, the Eagles waited for the market to settle, and then they struck with precision. The addition of Riq Woolen perfectly represents that strategy. This is a player with legitimate production, double-digit pass breakups every year, Pro Bowl level performance, elite athletic traits, and yet Philadelphia was able to bring him in on a one-year deal worth up to $15 million, with a cap hit of just $3.4 million. That's not just a signing, that's value at a premium position. Now pair that with the roster need. The Eagles clearly needed help at outside corner opposite Quinyon Mitchell, especially after rotating players like Adoree Jackson and Kelly Ringo last season. Instead of overspending early, they identified a high upside player and got him at a fraction of what others are paying at the position. That's how you build sustainably, but it doesn't stop there, because the real masterclass might be happening with the salary cap. When free agency began, the Eagles were sitting at about $5 million in cap space. Fast forward to now, and that number has jumped to $40 million, putting them in a top 10 position league-wide. That kind of flexibility doesn't happen by accident. This was achieved through a series of calculated moves. Extending Jordan Davis opened up $8 million. A renegotiation with Avonte Maddox added between $6 to $9 million. Landon Dickerson's contract was adjusted to create even more room. On top of that, the team managed the Dallas Goedert situation perfectly, pushing back key dates and ultimately bringing him back on a one-year, $7 million deal while avoiding a massive $20 million dead cap hit. Every move connects. Every decision builds toward flexibility, not just now, but in the future. And speaking of the future, the outlook is even more impressive. The Eagles are projected to have around $83 million in cap space in 2027 and $113 million in 2028. That gives them the ability to extend core players, make aggressive moves when needed, or pivot depending on how the roster evolves. It's long-term planning at a level that very few teams consistently achieve. Then you look at the collection of value deals across the roster, and it becomes even clearer what the plan is. Dallas Goedert on a cheap one-year deal. Hollywood Brown brought in as a vertical threat for up to $6.5 million, adding a dimension the offense was missing. Arnold Ebiketie signed for just $4.3 million guaranteed, a player who could realistically produce 7 to 10 sacks. Even depth moves like Johnny Munt and Grant Calcaterra come at minimal risk, but fill specific roles the team lacked last year. All of this points to one thing: this is not random. This is a front office executing a very specific vision, balancing competitiveness right now with flexibility for the future. And then there's the most intriguing situation of all: the handling of A.J. Brown. The Eagles have stood firm on their asking price, a first-round pick and a second-round pick, and they haven't flinched. While trade rumors swirl and offers come in behind closed doors, the organization has maintained control of the narrative. They haven't allowed the situation to become public chaos, and that alone protects the player's value. At the same time, the market is validating their stance. Comparable players are being moved for massive returns, reinforcing the idea that Philadelphia is absolutely justified in what they're asking for. And yet, they're not forcing anything. If the right deal doesn't come, they're fully prepared to keep an elite receiver on the roster for 2026. So when you step back and look at everything together, the patience in free agency, the precision in contracts, the creativity with the cap, and the discipline in trade negotiations, it really feels like the Eagles are operating on a completely different level compared to most of the league right now. The question is, as all of this continues to unfold, do you think this strategy puts the Eagles in the best possible position to contend immediately, or are they taking a bigger long-term gamble that could still backfire? And that's where things start to to get even more interesting, because this entire approach isn't just about building a competitive roster, it's about controlling every possible outcome before it even becomes a problem. When you look at how Philadelphia is navigating this offseason, it almost feels like they're always one step ahead of the rest of the league, anticipating reactions before they happen, and setting themselves up to win regardless of how situations unfold. Take the A.J. Brown situation a little deeper. Behind the scenes, there's clearly been communication between the player, his agent, and the organization. Maybe it's not a public trade demand, but it's hard to ignore the volume of interest and the number of reported offers that have come in quietly. And here's the key part: the Eagles are not entertaining those calls just for fun. There's intent there, but it's controlled intent. What makes this even more impressive is how they've handled the public side of it. Nothing has leaked in a way that damages the locker room. Nothing has spiraled into a media circus. That's not luck, that's leadership and organizational discipline, because the moment a player of that caliber goes public with a trade demand, his value can drop instantly. Teams start negotiating from a position of leverage, and suddenly you're not getting the return you should. Philadelphia completely avoided that scenario. They kept everything internal, protected the asset, and allowed the market to develop naturally. And as that market developed, it actually strengthened their position. We've seen multiple high-profile players moved for significant draft capital, reinforcing the idea that elite talent demands elite compensation. That's exactly what the Eagles are holding firm on. But here's where it becomes a real chess match. If a team eventually meets that asking price, you're talking about turning one player into multiple premium assets that can shape the roster for years. If no one meets it, you still have one of the best wide receivers in football lining up for you in 2026. That's what you call a win-win scenario, and very few teams ever manage to put themselves in that position. Now connect that back to everything else they've done. The value signings, the cap flexibility, the depth additions. All of it creates a roster that doesn't rely on just one player to function at a high level. Bringing in Hollywood Brown adds speed and vertical explosiveness. Keeping Dallas Goedert ensures stability at tight end. Adding pieces like Arnold Ebiketie strengthens the pass rush rotation. Even the smaller moves fill very specific gaps that showed up last season. So if A.J. Brown stays, this offense could be even more dangerous with better balance and more versatility. If he's traded, the Eagles are equipped with the financial flexibility and draft capital to pivot quickly and aggressively. Either way, they're prepared. And that's really the biggest takeaway from everything we're seeing right now. This isn't just about reacting to the offseason, it's about dictating it. While other teams are scrambling to fix holes or recover from overpayments, the Eagles are building layers, protecting themselves from risk, and maximizing every single asset they have. It's also worth noting how rare this level of consistency is. A lot of teams have one good offseason, maybe two if everything breaks right. But sustaining this kind of smart decision making year after year, that's what separates good organizations from elite ones. And right now, Philadelphia is making a very strong case that they belong in that elite tier. So as we move closer to the draft and continue to watch how these situations develop, especially with A.J. Brown, the pressure is not really on the Eagles. It's on the rest of the league to meet their terms or find another solution. Philadelphia has already positioned itself to come out on top no matter what direction this goes. Now I want to hear from you. Do you think the Eagles should hold on to A.J. Brown and make a run with this roster as it is? Or should they capitalize on his value right now and build even more for the future? And one more layer to this that fans really shouldn't overlook is how this approach changes the identity of the team moving forward. Because what the Eagles are quietly building here is not just a roster, it's a system that doesn't depend on desperation moves or short-term fixes. It's built on timing, leverage, and patience. And those three things are incredibly difficult to maintain in a league where pressure to win now can force bad decisions. Look at the flexibility they've created again. With the current cap situation and the projected space in the coming years, Philadelphia has positioned itself to be aggressive when the right opportunity appears. Not forced, not reactive, but aggressive on their own terms. That's a huge difference. When a star player becomes available, or when it's time to extend a core piece of the roster, they won't be scrambling to make room, they'll already be prepared. And that ties directly into the draft as well. Because if there's one thing we've learned from the most successful teams in the NFL, it's that sustained success comes from drafting and developing talent. The Eagles have stayed true to that philosophy while still being opportunistic in free agency. They're not abandoning one strategy for another, they're blending both at a very high level. Now imagine how this all comes together depending on what happens next. If the team enters the draft with this kind of cap flexibility and potentially additional picks depending on how situations like A.J. Brown play out, you're talking about a front office that can maneuver in multiple directions. They can trade up, trade back, stockpile assets, or target very specific players that fit their long-term vision. And for the fans, that should be both exciting and a little bit nerve-wracking at the same time. Because while everything looks controlled right now, the reality is that one major move can shift the entire trajectory of the team. That's the nature of the NFL, but the difference here is that the Eagles have built a foundation that can absorb those shifts better than most. So as this offseason continues to unfold, every move, every rumor, every report should be viewed through that lens. This isn't chaos, this isn't uncertainty. This is a calculated process that's been unfolding step by step with a clear plan behind it. And if you really think about it, that's what makes this entire situation so compelling right now, because it feels like the Eagles are sitting right at the edge of something bigger, something that hasn't fully revealed itself yet. Every move so far has been calculated, every decision layered with intention, and yet there's still this sense that the biggest domino hasn't fallen. Because let's be honest, teams don't operate with this level of patience and flexibility unless they're preparing for something. You don't preserve cap space, you don't stack value contracts, and you don't maintain leverage in trade talks unless you're waiting for the right moment to strike. And that's exactly where Philadelphia is right now, waiting. It could be the draft, it could be a trade that no one sees coming. It could even be the final resolution of the A.J. Brown situation, whether that means a blockbuster deal or a recommitment to building around him. But whatever it is, the groundwork has already been laid. That's the part that should stand out to every fan watching this unfold. And there's another angle to this too, one that doesn't always get talked about enough, and that's the message it sends inside the locker room. When players see a front office operating with this kind of clarity and control, it builds trust. It shows that there's a real plan in place, not just for this season, but for the future. And that matters when you're trying to keep a team focused, especially during an offseason filled with rumors and uncertainty. At the same time, it raises the internal competition level. When you bring in players on smart, low-risk deals, guys who are hungry to prove themselves, it pushes everyone else on the roster. Nothing is handed out. Roles have to be earned. And that's how you create depth, not just by adding talent, but by creating an environment where that talent has to perform. So now, everything comes down to execution. The strategy is there, the structure is there, the flexibility is there, but how it all translates onto the field is what will ultimately define this offseason, because we've seen teams win the offseason before and struggle when the games actually begin. The Eagles are trying to avoid that by building something more sustainable, something that doesn't rely on hype, but on substance. And that brings us back to where we started. This isn't about winning headlines in March. It's about being one of the last teams standing when it actually matters. And based on everything we're seeing right now, Philadelphia is giving itself a